Erickson. I am the president of the Hollywood chapter of the National Organization for Women. Yes, I am a man. Men should be feminists as well. If you are interested, I have applications. Put your email in the chat box. We'll send you an application if you want to do it. We are so excited that you are all joining us tonight for Oh Phyllis, the Real Mrs. America, with Hollywood Now's ERA officer, ERA historian extraordinaire, president of Pacific Shore now, Zoe Nicholson. Hello, Zoe.
Hello. How's everybody? I wondered if everybody got a chance to watch Mrs. America on Hulu.
Well, we're going to talk about it, and hopefully, if they didn't, they'll be able to watch it after this.
Okay.
A little bit of housekeeping for everyone. Obviously, there's the chat. If you have questions, our amazing Vice President, Karen Ayers, is on. She is kind of monitoring questions. Some of you even submitted them already ahead of time. So we'll have plenty of time for that. At any point, because this is our new normal, if there's connection issues or connectivity issues, we'll try to get it back up and running as quick as possible. And we'll continue to keep this event going. You can see wait, I have to do the right hand. Over here, or this side of me, you can have all of Zoe's social media information and a few photos that we have here of her, as well as you can follow the Hollywood chapter of the National Organization for Women as well. And so now I'm going to turn it over to the one, the only, Zoe Nicholson, and we're going to begin talking about Mrs. America, and she's going to share her story.
Thanks so much, John. Years ago, I did think I was the one and only, and so I tried to find out if there were other Zoe Nicholsons anywhere in the world, and I started, this is before Googling, and I found there was an Olympic swimmer, and there was a therapist in England, and I wrote them both, and I used to have this page called the Zoe Nicholsons of the World, but now there are so many I couldn't possibly keep track. I feel honored and want to do my best to say his name, George Floyd, and remember him today and his family, his beautiful family. And I also cannot let this day go by without mentioning that over 100,000 Americans have died with this unleashed virus. And so I made some calls today. The first thing I want to tell you, and I have notes because I attribute that to being 71, by the way. I made a call today to somebody who years ago in 2011 brought me to Texas A&M to speak. And flying Zoe to Texas A&M, now that was an event. And you might want to know that Texas A&M is a world unto itself. There actually is a pretend military on campus called the Cadet Corps. And it was going to be a series of talks by LGBTQ activists. So they had Lieutenant Dan Choi come, good friend Lieutenant Dan. And then 2 weeks later, I came to speak and I put on this PowerPoint on a call to activism, explaining nonviolent direct action, how it occurs, how change occurs in society, and what they might do to create change in their world. Mind you, this is Texas. This is Texas A&M in College Station, Texas. A little tiny airport, a little tiny plane, and yes, I did have to flap the whole way. And in the course of the talk, I had said something about Mrs. Schlafly. And I made some snide, sassy remark. This is 9 years ago, and I was definitely riding high on the possibility of getting rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and marriage equality on the brink, and all kinds of wonderful things were happening. The world was breaking open in possibilities. And someone asked me, was Mrs. Schlafly still alive? And I imagine that I said something offhandedly and rudely, actually, but knowing, I have to be honest, I probably did say, well, she'd really be better off dead. Or possibly I said, well, unfortunately, yes, she is. I said something to that effect, let's say. And a shitstorm took place that was unparalleled. Local legislators, students, the Corps of Cadets, there were letters written threatening my life. And what I had come to find out, and I called today to double check with my friend who had brought me on campus what had happened, because I went back and did some searching on the letters that were written. I'm telling you this story because I want you to understand who Phyllis really was and how adored she was. What a white queen of all things good and true she was. And a group of people called, they wanted to get rid of the LGBT center on campus, which was very new and very nice. And they wanted to actually clear it out and replace it with a traditional family values center. And so on a gun site, they posted that they were going to, and I quote, clear out the LGBTQ center. And what ultimately happened, and if you go there today, you'll see, I think every 12 inches along the baseboard now, there are panic buttons throughout the LGBT center at Texas A&M University. And that tells you the dramatic, the unbelievable kingdom she had. I say that on purpose, that was mindful. And you know, she was really just the girl in the cake. She had no power of her own. But if you can just somehow work with me on this to understand that I was flabbergasted to see an 8-episode series with Cate Blanchett playing her on television, streaming, like who cares? And hopefully by the time we're done, we're gonna know who cares and why they care, and what it would be so much better if we cared about more important things. So that was my little trip to Texas A&M. You know, I noticed last week a woman wrote on Facebook if Mrs. America was triggering anybody else, because it was seriously triggering her. And I have to be honest with you, it was seriously triggering me at the start. And, you know, I was a part of the Lavender Menace. And I remember my girlfriend, we probably would have been married if we could have been in 1977, watching this on television. And it was clear that we weren't welcome in Houston. Don't bother. And it was clear that they really would have preferred that if lesbians would either go in the closet or clear out, it would be a lot easier to pass the RA. It would be a lot easier for women on the left to actually get the rights they were seeking, fair wages and so forth, if lesbianism was not brought into focus. So yeah, a lot of the show was triggering. And then, you know, when they jumped the shark in episode 7, and you should know that the Paulson character, Alice, I'm really sorry they gave her that fabulous name. Alice was entirely made up. There was no such person. She's what Hollywood calls the composite. And, you know, the problem with historically messing with things like that is someday a teacher's going to be not feeling up to it, or it's raining and everybody's inside. So let's show a movie. Let's show Iron-Jawed Angels. And Alice had no ability to fight back because she was gone by the time that movie came out. She wasn't able to say that that gentleman caller with the little boy sitting at the table tying a shoe, Alice tied a shoe, if you recall, that man didn't exist. He was made up out of whole cloth. So when Hollywood does these things, because they need the arc, they need the love interest, they need the story to have certain characters so there could be some aggravation between them. how do we put that back in the toothpaste tube is really a problem. But I must tell you that at least with this, some of the people portrayed in the show are still alive. And if you read, my favorite article on all of this is in The Guardian, and it is an interview with Gloria Steinem. And she said it all in one word: it's ridiculous. So the whole program was, in fact, ridiculous. And now we have to clean up after it and tell you the truth. And ask that we do go forward in truth telling about who these people were, so we don't lift them up to the top of the mountain where they wished they were, where they wanted to be. So who was Phyllis? Yes, I met Phyllis. You probably saw the pictures. I want to tell you it was day 4, and day 4 of fasting is not an easy one. The easy ones come in maybe around day 10, but day 4 was a bear. And, you know, you're going through the sugar withdrawals, the food withdrawals. You have no idea what's going to happen. There are 500 people crammed in this little rotunda. I hesitated because maybe it was even more than 500. There were 8th graders on their civics class going through. There were all kinds of NOW people, League of Women Voters people. There were Republicans, there were Democrats. There were all these people all around circling. There were people standing there just loud enough so we could hear them calling us names. There were teachers saying, now those are witches over there. And be careful, don't look too closely at them. And then there were people equally ridiculous coming by thinking we were more important than they. And that was really stupid. But day 4 was the day of the Great Pizza Rebellion. And on that day, we were told at about 11:30 that someone was going to send the fasters a dozen pizzas, that they'd paid for them and they were going to send them to us. And I'll tell you, you'd think that our hair had been set on fire. It was a colossal undertaking to deal with the fallout of that. I think ultimately at the end it was pretty much just a joke that happened. But in the middle of this chaos, in came a stream of foot soldiers wearing red blazers with an eagle button. And of course, that was, the Eagles. And finally, at the end, came Phyllis herself. And Phyllis was, I noticed on Facebook, I found this interesting. So on Facebook, I posted that I met her and I got her autograph. I put it next to the pictures. And somebody who may very well be on this call wrote me and said, boy, I bet you kicked her ass. And I had no intention of that. That I'm not a fan of pie in the face. I'm not a fan of humiliating. I really just wanted to stand next to her and ask her for her autograph. I didn't tell the press I was going to go. And it's funny because after I had walked up to her and gotten her autograph, she was gracious. She's tall. She was tall and thin and stately, beautiful, everything you would imagine. Certainly in charge. And she said, why would you want my autograph? I remember this so vividly. And I said, well, because you're a woman who's figured out what power is. And I'm struggling myself to know what that is. And certainly you've done a great deal in your lifetime. And you're a memorable historic figure. And she signed this postcard for me, and I had my pen and I said thank you, walked away. Then the press wanted me to reenact the whole thing so they could get pictures. And that was not my intention at all. In due time, it was really curious that when we go into the chambers, and they have a upper and a lower chamber, they have a Senate and a House of Representatives, just like our federal Congress. They, all of a sudden on certain days, there would be these vases on desks with red flowers. And if you know your history, red is stop ERA. And, the flowers on the other side, the color would be yellow, which is the color of suffrage flowers, sunflowers and so forth. But what it meant to us, what we came to understand, was that the Eagles knew exactly when to show up the day of a vote. And they knew exactly when to send out their bread, their jam, their flowers, the day of the vote. But our side seldom knew what day a vote was going to be called. Would it come to the floor? And we were always scrambling around trying to figure that out. I want to just make a note. I thought it was so curious. Stop taking our privileges was actually where the word stop, ERA, came from, STOP. Stop taking our privileges. And you know something? I didn't know it at the time, but I'm smart enough now in 2020 to know if only we could diminish this idea of privileges. And how do we give them away as fast as they come our way? How do we shovel away the power as fast as it's given us? Which is actually the right way to handle leadership. But all she really wanted to do was collect power and elevate herself. And I wondered, as I'm sure you did, did she care at all about defeating the ERA? I'm not sure that was actually what Phyllis was about. I think it's what her followers were about. But I think fundamentally, Phyllis, as you saw last night, spoiler alert, she wanted to be appointed to the UN. She wanted a cabinet post. She had her eyes set on a sole position of authority with people under her. It had nothing to do with equality of rights under the law, not being denied or abridged by all 50 states. So, I am troubled and not surprised that, she was portrayed on Hulu. And the people in my world, in the pool where I swim, all of you, and all my friends on social media, and my friends locally here with Suffrage 100, the places I've been able to speak around the country, and those of you who've seen Tea with Alice and me, I care a whole lot about women knowing who they are and what their potential is. And I'm not certain that Phyllis even ever understood what feminism really is. And although she consistently portrayed it so inaccurately, there was nothing anti-male about it. If anything, it maybe saw a sign in the show last night that said, ERA 90% gay. They didn't want us homosexuals anywhere near it, which only demonstrated all the more how little they really understood what would happen if women just had a clear path to realize their dreams, to protect the planet and actually have a secure life in and of themselves. And in fact, she was working to control her competition because she wanted that mountaintop all to herself. Unlike, what we're working for today actually is maybe to turn the mountain upside down. So, the workers could be on top. So all of society could be on top, to flatten that mountain into a circle, which is much more a traditionally feminist idea. What we're trying to do is not easy. I certainly have no interest in going back to the matriarchy. I don't want to go back to another form of a triangle of power. I think what we're trying to do actually now is get rid of the binary in totality. Wouldn't that be fantastic? We'd have to redo everything to be able to do that. But it is really what we want to do. And I think one place we can do it is to trivialize this sorority idea, till it's unrecognizable. You know, the pie in the face of Anita Bryant, the pie in the face with Phyllis, gave them a certain power. And I would have preferred them to be not noticed. You know, that it was the patriarchy actually bestowing on them this illusion of power, having Phyllis open the CPAC meetings. And she would walk across the stage in her beautiful outfits. And everyone in CPAC adored her. Well, why? Because she was able to portray that they were pro-women. And you and I know that simply isn't true. The real problem was and is and has been since we separated abolition from suffrage. You know, this idea of intersectionality, the intersection of race and economics, everything old is new again. If we had at the time insisted that abolition and suffrage and full citizenship be available to all, instead we had this puny idea, and I think we have it now. We have to get rid of this idea that we can only do one thing at a time. You know, if the house is on fire and the baby's crying, well, I don't know, I think I better make a pros and cons list and see which one I should tend to first. No, you figure out a way that you're going to do both at the same time. And I really think that the ERA would have fallen as, you know, you've heard like, I think it was Gandhi who said something like, you know, a ripe apple from the tree. If we had understood we had to do it all together, that what we are having a problem with as feminists is understanding that those with the least amount of power should be in charge, those of us with the most amount of power should be under them, and saying, cheers for you. And that would be, in my opinion, what real feminism is. So we are not on our knees saying, sir, can I have some more, please? So, you know, when I am privileged to speak to particularly college classes, one of my favorite things to tell the female members of class is you have no idea who you are. Because I don't know who I am, and you don't know who you are, because we have not yet had a wide enough path, a strong enough vision to actually figure out what our potential is, and to continue to measure ourselves against one another. What a puny point of view. I certainly don't think that the Williams measured themselves against their components. They measured themselves against what they could be. And with each passing day, if I could wish you anything, is that you measure yourself against, have you met your best possible potential, and then move it a little bit out. And you'll never be bored. It might be dark, it might be light, but you'll never be bored. So who's Phyllis? You know, Phyllis is an interesting woman who hoodwinked the women. I don't know if she hoodwinked herself. And, but I'm not going to put a pie in her face. I'm going to recognize the sorority for what it is. It's an instrument of the cheapest labor force in the world. And remember this, if you remember nothing else about the Equal Rights Amendment. This is all you need to know. The reason it has not passed, been signed, and is part of our Constitution right this second is because women are the cheapest labor force on the face of the earth. And as feminists, our mission is, our sole mission is to believe and live with the knowledge that we are not cheap labor. We are priceless. So I didn't do too bad with my notes. Thank you for listening to me. I'm Zoom adverse, but I hope you all have some interesting questions, and I know John does. So I will be quiet.
Zoe, thank you so much. This is the moment when we would be clapping and talking and doing all the great stuff, and people are asking great questions. I've been tracking them in the chat. I just want everyone to also make sure that people know to go into the Q&A and ask those questions. We'll try to get to all of them. If not, a lot of people have put it in there. Karen's tracking it as well. Zoe, I have a question for you. When we first started doing, and we said we were going to do this event, and what we really wanted to get out of it is that I know your favorite movie, Wink, is Iron Jawed Angels.
I watch it constantly.
Constantly. And you talked about that in your remarks about the Hollywoodization of struggle, of activism, of actual people's lived experiences, the ways in which you talked about them and share them in both your book as well as all the work that you're doing. There's something troubling about the show, though, that really tries to pinpoint into these lives of women and some men in there that skirts the actual true history. And I think you talked about it a little bit, but can you talk about the damaging nature that glorifying people that actually did a more adverse cause to our history, and giving them almost like this pedestal? Because I feel like she's going to win awards, the cast and the crew are going to be honored. I mean, what does that really do at the end of the day when we go back to remember people like yourselves who fasted for the ERA, people like yourselves who gave up everything for the ERA, and we still do?
Well, I think the biggest problem is that people actually believe, and many do. And, I see people write idiot as a comment on Facebook, and I always think, well, writing that little word didn't exactly address the entire problem. I think, number one, we need to understand that we are fogged about why the ERA has not passed. And one of the ways we are fogged about it is by attributing its defeat to, this little group of women. That is just not understanding the general situation. Kids probably, maybe, I don't know. It wasn't that gripping, let's face it. But maybe the show will be nominated for an Emmy. I think that it was very negative about Phyllis. I mean, I think it made Phyllis look really bad.
Yeah.
And yesterday, the one last night really did, and the Sarah Paulson character. But
we should say spoiler alert for everyone. We assume you've watched it. If not, we are very sorry. But if you read history books, you'll be able to know a little bit, I guess.
No, I felt we were actually going to be talking about the show a little bit.
Yeah,
so I will go back to the Houston one. And they also trivialized what was going on there, the Primal Scream room. I mean, seriously, I did a Primal Scream here in my house just watching it. What they made us all look like that we were doing, and that the implication that Friedan apologizing to lesbians was going to be the end-all be-all of, all the dykes are cool with you now, Betty, not a problem. That was not happening either. As somebody who has spent, I think now 12 years doing nothing but reading about Alice Paul and everything Alice Paul adjacent, there's something really magical if you read, let's say, 10 books on the same person, and you know that 4 of them loved that person, 2 of them couldn't care less about that person, And the other ones were academics who wanted to get every single fact correct. But eventually, after you read those 10 books, you get a feel for who they were. And that's why I fell so crazy in love with Alice. You know, she knew on that day when Dr. Sandler and Gloria Steinem ran to the house at 144 Constitution Avenue and said, Alice, Congress has passed the ERA, it's going out to the states. And Alice said, well, did they attach a deadline? And this is a story that Bunny told me over the phone. Dr. Sandler told me over the phone. And I haven't forgotten your question, John. And she said, well, it will never pass if they attached a deadline. Yeah. That's where it's luscious. That's where it's real fact. Because you heard it from somebody who did two things. They knew the fact, and then they figured out a heartfelt way to tell it. You know, what I've learned in studying one person for 12 years is that when I talk about her, she just sort of pours out of me. And it's because I have said you have to love the worst of them before you actually know them. Mm-hmm. But you know, when we want everything faster than Twitter, they gave us more text we can put in now in the last few years, but our attention spans are so diminished, and to the deep dive into history is so spectacular when you understand that women in 1920 were practicing intersectionality, that women at the time of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire was, there were rich women who lived on Fifth Avenue showing up there to be part of unionizing. You really get an idea of lineage, and then hopefully we could restore this idea that elders might know something rather than shoving them in buildings hoping they die.
Yeah. Zoe, we got a really good question in the Q&A, and it applies to something on that you're wearing. Could you tell people what the Lavender Menace is? Because some people might not know that, because actually in the show, they talked about Betty's anti-lesbian stance in relation to certain things. They actually, if I don't remember, they didn't really use the word Lavender Menace a lot, if at all. Once. But could you talk about what the Lavender Menace is?
Well, yes, it's what, I mean, Betty did apologize for it. She said it once at the mic in the show. But what happened is that a group of women who were lesbians went into the conference, and they all, under their jackets, had on Lavender Menace t-shirts. And they stood up and took off their jackets, and they all were coming out, so to speak, that, oh, by the way, yes, we have lesbians in the house. And, I don't mind saying, I suppose, that I don't want to necessarily die with this knowledge. I've been pretty forthcoming about it before, but at the time when we got to the Ramada Inn, NOW paid for us we were sitting on the floor of a woman's house in Springfield, Illinois on like day 5, 6, 7. We were thrown out of the church where we had been staying. And NOW stepped forward and got us rooms at the Ramada Inn. And Gloria Steinem rented us a mobile, some sort of van that we could all fit in so we could move around together. But the two lesbians, the Fasters, we were put in a different building. And we were told in no uncertain terms were we to be out. That the whole time we were there for the 45 days of the fast, we should not be out. Because, the Lavender Menace is still alive and well.
Very much alive and well. One thing that You know, it's interesting because I watched the show in like this hate love watch thing, because obviously you love Kate Blanchett because she's Kate Blanchett and she's fabulous. You love Sarah Paulson. I mean, this show has just got the gangbusters of everyone. I mean, you know, people want their questions answered, Zoe. They're calling your house. That's how much they want their question answered. But, you know, one thing that, you know, as a gay man watching the show, you know, Phyllis's relationship with her gay son and the history of her gay son actually later on is fascinating. But, you know, that scene in the church that when their friend gets married and he's attracted to the groom, you know, I Phyllis's relationship to obviously the gay community is one thing, but you know, it's oftentimes when we hear about these hardliners, these people who believe in these very strict normative ideas, that then they themselves have LGBTQ people in their homes, right? Or that were a part of organizations, because we're everywhere, right? What did you think of that, like those little snippets of how she looked at her son, or that, I don't know, they tried to soften her in some way?
Yes, her six jewels. Last night she introduced them as her six jewels. And yes, they were so precious to her that she didn't take care of them. She was not in the house. She was not doing much for the household and their lives. You know, I don't know too much about her relationship with her son, but certainly, you know, we all know that Reagan had a gay child as well. You know, it's not unusual. Certainly, my family was less than thrilled. The good news that happened in my family was my mother sought solace with a Jesuit, and the Jesuit said, "Now, Jean, not to worry. We know it's just a phase." And at the time I was furious, and then I thought, no, damn, yeah, it is a phase, Mom, because that was her way of getting out of feeling that she was going to hell.
Yeah.
Was her concern. And so she just prayed a lot and hoped that, you know, I would get out of the phase. But moreover, my brother called me on Christmas of 2016 and said, "Mr. Trump is moving to the White House. It's time to get back in the closet." And I said to my brother, you know, I've never been in a closet. I'm not sure what to do in there. I think it's a little late to think about a closet in my case. But yeah, that's a problem. But I want to say something really insulting. I think the show was so shallow. There are 8-episode shows that are not so shallow, that I don't think they were prepared to deal with anything of any consequence in any depth. The mistreatment of her daughter, giving testimony against the ERA in the committee in the whole, when both chambers came together to hear testimony. Her daughter, there were 6 young ladies who spoke. And it's a reenactment I sort of put on in my show, that, you know, the use of the people around her, it was no different from our children and the other people. And I just think the show really did not dig deeply into anything.
You know, I'm going to ask you a question from our dear friend Jerry Burton, who is the president of the Nevada State chapter of the National Organization. I think we know her. I'm pretty sure we know her. She's an amazing woman. I'm so glad she's virtually here with us today. Hi, Jerry. Hi, Jean, if you're listening. And she said something that I think is really powerful. And Zoe, you spoke at the Women's March when here in Los Angeles, but something that people sometimes say is that if we feel like women or other social groups were more powerful then than they are now, and you look at places like Nevada that has the first majority female legislature, I know Senator Pat Spearman's on the call, as well as women are more involved with activism than ever before, and I say that's no, because I feel like we are more powerful now, but I would love to hear what you think of the state of activism and owning our power are right now.
I have 3 things I want to say. I hope I remember them all. This being 71 is really challenging. But years ago, I read a book by Marie C. Wilson, one of my favorite people on the face of the earth. She's the one who made President Barbie, which, come on, who doesn't love that? Anyway, she wrote a fabulous book called Closing the Leadership Gap, and she's talking in the book about this conference in South Africa. And women from all over the world, it's an international conference like Beijing had been. And at the end of the conference, these women from South Africa rise to speak, and they tell the women from the United States that things there in the United States are so bad that these women from South Africa offer to come and help them. That was a piece of humble pie I needed so badly. And that was something I read long ago. I remember literally staying in a hotel room, and I think it was with Lindsay Horvath, Mayor Lindsay Horvath.
We know her too, and we like her.
Reading out loud this section in this book, you got to hear this, you got to hear this. That we need to understand we are not all that in a bag of chips. Mm-hmm. The second thing that happened that really I've never gotten over, again from another book by, the fabulous Carolyn Maloney. The name of the book is Rumors of Our Progress Have Been Greatly Exaggerated. And there's a very specific piece in there, and I can tell you the page number in later, on social media, because I have it circled about a dozen times, that until women reach a preponderance in leadership, which is 34%, it has to break 1/3. They're just hanging out. They're just another voice. They haven't yet brought the guts of being women, that moving towards abundance and life, that moving away from scarcity and death, that need to squeeze that last piece of pie because there's only so much pie. And to become that world where all we have to do is build more bakeries. That happens when women are the preponderance in any leadership body. And that's why this last time, even in 2018, when more women were elected to the federal Congress, we got 2 more. Oh God, we got 3 more. Let's all go crazy. No, we have 23% people. Get over yourself.
Yeah.
And it is not enough, as demonstrated by what happened in Virginia, as demonstrated by what happened in Nevada. If you look at what bills went through the legislature in the first week of Virginia, when those women sat down, it was enough to make your head spin.
Yeah. Because
women understand the difference between making money off of life and actually giving life. And, I'm pretty wrapped up in the idea.
I want to ask you a question that's near and dear to your heart, one that's asked from a person that we both love as well, Marie Cartier, fellow Long Beachian, Long Lakewoodian, but it's about Alice Paul. Alice is not part of the show. And as the Alice Paul scholar, as I attribute you to, because you know more about Alice Paul than any historian I know, and just so people know, Zoe and I bonded over our love of women's history. That's where my expertise comes in. I have 2 masters in women's history, and Margaret Sanger specifically, and suffrage. But I would love for you to bring Alice's voice into this a little bit, because Alice is the author of the ERA. She wrote it, right? And her role and her story isn't told. And that's really upsetting to all of us that actually know her story, right? That actually know what's going on. And I would love to maybe for you to give that space to her right now.
Well, thank you, John. If imagine you're going to make a movie about Alice Paul, and there are certain high notes that I would hope were hit. And one of them is what I consider her road to Damascus, when her botany teacher says, Alice, I think that you actually are destined for something greater than being a school teacher. Nothing diminishing there, but that she really was going to affect a greater number of people. And he sent her to work in a settlement house in New York, 91 Riverton Street. And Eleanor Roosevelt had been there just a couple years before. And Alice, for the very first time in her privileged life, she met with the poor. And in that case, it was a lot of Irish and Italian people who were coming over. They had just left Ellis Island and they were coming to the settlement house. And she had this moment where she realized that economic parity, that equality of rights under the law was the only thing that was actually going to change their lives. And she did the classical thing for white girls to do who were going to Swarthmore or Vassar, and they went bicycling in Europe. That was what they did. It was a different time. And of course, then one afternoon she met the intoxicating Christabel Pankhurst. And she got force-fed in England, served time in England, worked with the suffragists in England, and she came here to the U.S. Just around her birthday in 1910. Her birthday's January 11th. And, she, one way or another, came to the determination that women had to get the vote first. So it's funny because I took you through all of that because I want you to understand that the vote meant almost something to her in application. And when they did get the vote, when she got that call from Sue Sheldon White, August 18th, saying Tennessee has voted, she for the photo op, she raised her glass of grape juice, by the way, and toasted the flag, but she did not go out that night. She did not celebrate. She packed her bags. She left the house. She did not want to pay rent on the house another month. She wanted to send out fundraising letters and get on with getting to law school. And she went to American University and got a law degree because she needed to work on the Equal Rights Amendment. And with a committee, she worked with Crystal Eastman and a group of judges to get this written. And in 1923, that's only 3 years later, she takes this document to Susan B. Anthony's grave on the 75th anniversary of Seneca and tells Susan, we're going to get this. We're going to have equality under the law. And you set that stone in place for us. As she said, another pebble, right, in the mosaic. She had to get that vote. So, the fact that she wrote the ERA and that she understood it, that she died without it, and she died in 1977, July 6th. And what a life lived, how wonderful she was. But I want you to know that she had that epiphany about the necessity that she needed to right the wrong that John Adams had not heeded his wife. That, gee whiz, John, remember the women.
Yeah.
So I think that's Alice.
Alice's voice is just so powerful. I think about her so much while I've been watching the show, and, how we forget the author of what we're actually fighting for, and I think at the end of the day, you really mentioned such a great point about the ERA's ultimate, the force against the ERA that we still see today, right? Virginia being our 38th state. You were there with Jerry and so many others. And it's really the corporate capitalistic industries that really do not want to give up the cheapest labor force in the world, in the country, right? The health insurance industry and all of that. I mean, there was a great question from Tashin. I'm going to butcher your last name, so I apologize, but we're going to answer your question. But she says, does the ERA influence the economy? And I know in regards to the ERA and the economy, you could talk about it ad nauseum, but could you maybe develop that a little bit more for us?
Well, I just think that what we really need is a preponderance of women in legislatures. Because even if we had boatloads of money, the disposition of that money, what are we going to do with it? Are we going to move it to health, education, and welfare? Or are we going to build more, private industry prisons?
Yeah.
It's really astounding to see what happens when women are in charge if you really study it. We right now rank in the entire world number 85 of women in leadership. The UN publishes that and redoes and recalculates it every 2 months and posts it. Where we are, we're number 85 now out of 195 nations. I think that the Equal Rights Amendment is going to level the playing field. I don't even like that reference. That's why I hesitated. I don't like that reference. What I really want to do is elevate the Constitution. If we could elevate the Constitution to its fullest expression, and that it would be including everyone, at that point, I think the whole, not just the industry of the country, but the attitude, the vibrational frequency, the fundamentals of the United States would change, and the distribution of the wealth would change, because with more women in legislation, I don't think that we would be giving 86% of our stimulus money to the top 1% when we have a international pandemic.
Yeah, that's so powerful. One thing that I think I liked about the show, I'm going to say something positive. I'm going to say something positive a little bit, is, the role, and you mentioned it a little bit about talking about intersectionality. The show itself, I think gave a voice to Shirley Chisholm in a way that we often still ignore within the women's movement, within all movements when we look at internalized and systemic racism and the ways we still have to combat it, both within ourselves as well as within all of the institutions. You started off your speech, the event, by paying homage to some of the news that we've been seeing, and it's really important. But oftentimes women of color, communities of color get pushed to the side. And I think the show showed that Phyllis was willing to sacrifice in whatever way, or certain movements more on the conservative side are willing to let forces that we would say are not a part of our community, our homes, have a large voice. And I keep thinking about the scene where she's allowing people to, at that dinner scene, or they're at the convention, and she allows people from the South to say very racist stuff. And that's a depiction, that's not actually verbatim because we don't know what was said, but you and I both know that where there's racism, like where there's smoke, there's fire. But I think Shirley Chisholm was able to have a little bit of the limelight in some way in that episode. And I appreciated that, but I would love to talk maybe a little bit more about still the racist actions that we face even today.
Well, I was relieved to see that they were very forthcoming about just shoving Shirley Chisholm aside. And I also was glad that they represented, let me say something really good. The one person that I know that I've met, that I've spent time with, actually I spent a weekend in a hotel with Flo Kennedy, but that's another story for another time. Is Gloria Steinem. And I do think that Gloria is the deepest, most lovely, complicated, careful, inclusionary, respectful woman of the that you can imagine. You cannot overstate the depth of Gloria Steinem. And I thought the show took a stab at it, which only illustrated all the more that I think the writers were particularly shallow. and I don't know if that was intentional or what. I don't mean to say they are as human beings. I'm just saying I think they really just stayed up here in, you know, the meringue and never got down to it. But I think that, you know, we've been discarding the getting called to the carpet, our internal and opportunistic racism that you know, how many more have to die this way, and how many wonderments happen, like the women who just wrote that letter saying, I beg your pardon, Mr. Biden, but you had damn well better pick a Black woman for your VP. You know, we just bailed you out of and
We saved your campaign.
I mean, that was really extraordinary. And you know, I am deeply troubled if people are gonna not understand that it is time. We need to, first of all, I think a woman's going to become president by appointment. I don't think it's going to happen by election. Many women rose to power by appointment, the death of their husband. Circumstances created it along the way. When you end up with a room full of people who don't want women actually honestly elected, they end up with a seat sometimes by appointment, ergo Mary Bono. She's the one who comes to my mind right now. But anyway, I do think that we need to step aside and say, yeah, you lead. Because you needed the vote more, you cared about the vote more, you started on suffrage earlier, and we're all standing around taking bows like we got suffrage. Come on, white ladies got to vote. And even Alice herself said, referring to those very ladies who got suffrage, who won it in 1920, they will always vote with their husband. Women will not be voting in their own self-interest. And you know why she knew that? Because she knew what their real self-interest was. She knew that women would never be whole until they had their own money, their own employment, their own lives. Oh, Doris Stevens just made a premiere debut.
Yep.
Everybody, Doris. Sorry.
Don't worry, Winnie jumped into the bedroom. We are all pet lovers here. I didn't know who opened the door, and it was Winnie, and she walked right in and laid on the bed. And I said, okay, that's fine.
Exactly.
You know, Zoe, one thing that that Nadia Sutton, who's a member of the West Hollywood Women's Advisory Board here, and we love Nadia. She's also our past Women's Herstory honoree for the chapter this last year. She said something that I think I know you talked to me about with your mentorship, with your friendship, but how our past experience we use to empower and help others, right? And I see that you as a leader, you use your experience in the past to shed light on the injustices in the world, but the ways in which we need to respect and I think bring in voices that oftentimes aren't heard. Can you talk a little bit about how your experience, and this is a loaded question, but your experience fighting for the ERA has allowed you to change a generation of women to really realize their power and use it for good? Women and men, because I'm so sorry I shouldn't be gender specific, because you've empowered me and taught me a lot of stuff. Even though you might not want to admit to it, but you're not.
You know, I'm still looking for that, to do that. I feel still called to do that. I don't think that's been, you know, a fate that I can't check that off my list. I am trying to influence a generation and teach this generation, and I've done it every which way, but turning inside out. I mean, taking my love for Alice Paul and turning it into a one-woman show was simply my way of continuing to teach. Now, what do you do when you're not an academic? You don't have a PhD. You can't even go to the Radcliffe Library online because you don't know the secret elitist perfect word to put in the password field for you to look at firsthand documents. You know, that's the world I live in, where so I went to people who knew her and made calls, and And I found out about Alice any way I could through Ancestry.com, and then her family approached me. I got to have conversation with the Jewish family that she got the ability to move to America after they were rescued from concentration camps. I dig deeply and try to do what I can. And what I'm hoping is that I'm so on fire about this issue. I didn't know. And I didn't know the 2020, the Convergence of Women's History Month 2020, Alice Paul, the ERA, going to Virginia. I had no idea that was all going to sort of be one gigantic snowball in my life. But I certainly, until the ERA is done and people start applying it, we don't even know what it's going to do.
Yeah. Zoe, that just is so you never stop fighting. You never stop, I think, believing in the end goal, and that's passing the ERA. That's getting it signed, sealed, delivered every way, which shape and form. Because we have people, and I'm an educator, you're an educator, we have people on this call that may or may not know where the ERA is right now. Would you just give a little update on what's going on with the ERA, so that way we can continue to, I guess, give a little call to action or give people an update?
Well, there were two Zooms today on this very subject, neither of which did I attend, as Zoom and digital meetings for some people are very difficult.
Yeah.
And there's actually been a bit written about it, that it's sort of in the current circumstances that we've been in since March 9th, that it actually makes one feel even more lonely and removed. And so I usually have a pretty adverse reaction to it. But help me, where were we going with that, John?
We're giving an update on what's going on with the ERA right now.
There were two meetings today all about it, and I didn't attend them. Sorry, I digress. Here's what I know, that there are people on this call that know a whole lot more about the current status than I do. But the Nevada certification by the Attorney General was sent to the National Archivist. It was accepted. The Attorney General, the state's Attorney General for Illinois, sent the certification to the archivist. It was accepted. At the time, the 38th, which was Virginia, was sent to the archivist. I don't know if they sought counsel or counsel sought them. That is one thing I don't know. But they were advised to not certify that a 30th state had arrived. So me being more than cynical about the current administration, I don't think that, and I think that until both chambers in Congress are blue and the White House is also blue, that to have that deadline declared unconstitutional, which in fact it was, and to seal the deal to get all 38 certified, because the deadline in fact was not right. Just for those who may not know it, the actual amendment that passed took 203 years to pass, the Madison Amendment, the one we were, the DRA was going to be, but wasn't. So they did something that historically is how the oppressor controls people. There's term limits, time limits, rape kit limits. How long does a rape actually exist on the books? Mm-hmm. Having time limits is one of the ways that we sort of fall off the cliff of justice. So they decided, and when they told Alice, yeah, there's a time limit, she said, well, that's that. And then when they went back, if you can imagine, they go back, they get 7 years, and then they ask for more, and they get 3 years and 3 months. Well, zippity-doo-dah. It should have been no deadline.
Yeah.
So always be careful when the person who's doling out privilege puts a time limit on it.
because there is no time limit on equality. We need it now.
Yeah, but there is no time limit on amendments to the
Exactly.
Constitution, period, end of story, except if it's for women.
Yeah, except if it's for women. That's exactly it. You know, this pandemic and this world that we're in right now really pushed, as you said, all these connections from the 2020 being the 100th anniversary to celebrating suffrage in 2020. Can you talk a little bit about how we're going to celebrate suffrage in 2020 and moving events to 2021? Because we can always celebrate the work that we've been doing, but work that you've been working on to make sure that we don't forget this momentous occasion and our history.
Well, we don't really know what's going to happen with our stay at home and opening things up. Is it going to blow up in our face? You know, I have my own opinions on that, but that's not the point. You're asking, I think, two questions. One is, what is happening to the formal celebration of the centennial? And under, you know, the inspiration of the National Women's History Alliance, which is really one of the major movers and shakers of the centennial celebrations. And you can find them online. NWHP, National Women's History Alliance, is their name. We are going to be asking our local legislators, our organizations, our commissions, and women's organizations to actually do the proper centennial year, which would be August 26, 2020 to August 26, 2021, and make that, in fact, our centennial year, which means that all the panels and movies and film festivals and galas and events and awards and wonderful things that were happening, drawing attention to the vote, will commence on August 26, 2020. Now, the second part of the question, which I think is far more germane, is what the hell are we celebrating? Which is, we need to make sure, if you really are a suffragist, if you really are a suffragette, then you have only one thing on your plate, and that is to make sure every American can vote. And that is the work of suffrage. Is one of my many hashtags. Suffrage is unfinished business. And until every American can vote, be they have an address or not, right? That's one of the issues, right? Where are they? And to make sure every single American who can vote, that is really the work of suffrage. And
So
it
true.
certainly isn't done.
Yeah, that's so true. And I love how you said that. You know, the role of feminism isn't done. The role of, anti-racism work isn't done. You know, the role of, I think working for people who have been just, that are impacted, our workers, our individuals that are experiencing homelessness. Michelle Stonis asks, what's one way that we can keep advancing feminism? How can young women get involved, and what can we do?
Well, Michelle, I happen to know, is a history teacher that cares a great deal about teaching applied history.
Yeah.
Like how history can be used, what can you learn from it and apply it to today. And I think that, that's one of the reasons why I fell in love with history. I certainly didn't care that much about history per se, in and of itself. But when I found out that Alice Paul and Mahatma Gandhi were in a class with Mrs. Pankhurst, and she said, let's go break windows and set buildings on fire. And both of them said, whoa, we're out of here. And they both wrote about it. That's when I came to understand that 1909 at Royal Albert Hall, something happened that I care about, that affected my life, that nonviolent direct action came to my world. And I had spent like 4 years doing Gandhi immersion. I read by immersion. It's a different way to read. It's a thing I do. And I spent 4 years only reading Gandhi. And then I found out America has their own Gandhi, that Alice Paul had been there. Alice Paul started practicing nonviolent direct action in 1913 here in America. She created an acute situation by going down that street and marching to the White House. She was the first person to ever take a march to the White House for political reasons. That it was a woman And I didn't even really know that much about her, but it was a woman that had begun nonviolent direct action here in America. When you know things like that and it informs you today, you know, we had silent sentinels here in Long Beach last fall, standing in front of the California Democratic Convention. There were silent sentinels with signs in Spanish.
Yeah.
And in English, standing there, Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? You know, we're still waiting.
Yeah. Okay, so the questions are going crazy. People want the Flo Kennedy story.
Oh, I'm sure they do. You know, if you look at pictures, yeah, I posted pictures of Maria. Maria and I were actually in Chicago for the Mother's Day March. And we were basically, you know, two girls moving on a dime, and we had no money at all. And Flo let us stay in her hotel room, which was crowded with the stars of the movement, as you can only imagine. But it, you know, it really was phenomenal. And of course, she had her leopard cowgirl hat on, and she was all that. She was everything you might hope for and multiplied times 10. And imagine going to the Mother's Day March with Flo Kennedy. It was fun.
One thing that I know you're really passionate about is fighting for the rights of the LGBTQ community, but also transgender equality, and fighting for our trans brothers and sisters. And we got a question that, you know, like what we see and saw in the show with the Eagle Forum, having people that were supportive of segregation and all these other aspects. The far right has also joined up and tried to destroy, as you know, from Reagan onward, even before, the opposition of LGBTQ rights. But then specifically when we look at the fight now for transgender equality. And the question is, this is, I think, an easy question, but should the trans community be included in the fight against the patriarchy? I think the answer is yes, but what do you, I think
Here's what I really think. I think that as a feminist, whoever has less power than you do, you give them all you have and you get behind them and say, if you fall, I'm here. If you trip, I'm here. That's what we're called to do. And, you know, I've made it very clear. I posted it on my Facebook page, apparently where all wonderful things happen. You know, if you're a TERF, unfriend me now because you don't want me finding out in any other way. Just disappear. As a feminist, to stand strong and say anyone who's woman identified as a woman, you know, is just the beginning. That's where we start. And I think we need to understand that this idea of the binary, it belongs to the patriarchy. It is one of their functions, one of their tools of separating people, identifying people, little boxes. It's why Phyllis got so much traction, because the women did not want to leave their privilege, S-T-O-P. And, you know, the trans people, let me say something about that. It's really off topic here. You know, I believe that change is the hand of God in motion. As Mary Daly, the TERF herself that she was, said, you know, God's a verb. And I think that the trans people are that far ahead of us because they already found out this whole binary thing is crazy talk. I mean, it's some sort of, maybe it worked for some people in some ways. I guess it cut down on how many bathrooms you have to build or something. I'm not too sure, but you know, the very idea that in the beginning, you know, there was the light and the dark. If you read the Tao, if you read the Bible, if you read the classic scriptures, they're binary. It's just not necessary. It's not integral to who we are. It's part of a mythology that rules us. And the people who got that memo first is the trans community. You know, they've already busted through something we're still struggling with.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty happy that the time has come for us to actually take this on and get out of the way.
Yeah, you look at the Compton cafeteria riots. I mean, the role that transgender women, women of color have played in advancing these things. I think you make a beautiful point. One question that Zahira asks, and this goes back to the comments that you made about nonviolent direct action, that sometimes that, you know, in communities of color that we're seeing on the news, even with yesterday, that, you know, nonviolent direct action doesn't work sometimes. Could you talk a little bit more about nonviolent direct action, its power, its purpose? I know you're a big believer in it. You know, how can we make it for everyone, even though it might not be for everyone? I mean, I'm babbling here, but I would love to give you that space to talk a little bit more about it.
I think there's an internal decision that you're not going to be the agent of violence. You have to start there. And even getting that centered, getting that sort of, you know, idea, that beam of light from the base of who you are all the way out to the universe, that you are not going to be the agent of violence. That's a reconciliation you can do all by yourself. Now, you know, it's beyond interesting to ask me right now on May 28th, 2020, because this pandemic is doing the very thing that it's stopping the very thing that I thrive on, which is the right to assemble. And watching these brave people in the streets of Minneapolis today, standing there with their signs, or the people on the freeway last night here in Los Angeles,
Yeah.
watching the people on the side of right, and they're not standing there with automatic weapons, like some other people who have moved in a different direction. The nonviolent direct action, it simply means that you have made a commitment that though violence is around you, weather is violent. Mother Nature every now and then just decides to, you know, put a crack in the earth. There is violence around us, but if you yourself are not going to be an agent of violence, that's really what this is about. And nonviolent direct action, you know, the greatest teacher you can really watch. Oh, I'm so glad you made me think of this. Thanks so much, John.
You're welcome. I'm here to help.
You want to see a movie that actually tells the truth, every word, every motion, every stance, every costume, every placement, you can watch Gandhi.
Yeah.
Because Peter Attenborough, there's actually a book, I own the book. There's actually a book where Peter Attenborough takes the photograph of the actual people, Kripalani and Patel and all the people in the photo, the real photo, and he poses that exactly in the movie. And, you know, he cared to represent it precisely. But you'll learn about nonviolent direct action and what happened at the Darasan Assault Works. You'll learn about what happened when Gandhi walked to the sea. He was not an agent of violence, no matter what happened. And of course, the remark, the question always is, somebody says to him, now you have to remember what year this is, you know, this man died in January 1948. They asked him, what would nonviolent direct action do in the face of Hitler? And Gandhi said with a terrible heavy heart, he said, well, of course, there would be many losses. And I think of that when I see these people on the streets in Minneapolis today. And saying, you know, this cannot go on. This simply cannot go on. And I think about what I would have done in that place if I was the person seeing that happen. What would I be willing to do? And the only thing I know for sure is that I have prepared myself to not be an agent of violence. I don't know how brave I would be. I don't know what the outcome would be. But I hope that my years of self-training, that, been over 50 years now, that I would take a billy club in the face. I would stand next to a horse, that I would heckle a very popular president, which I've
Which
had.
you've never done.
No, I have. I've had.
No, I know. Yes, for those of you that do not know, if you check out Zoe's Facebook or any of her social media, you can see when she was fighting for Don't Ask, Don't Tell, because it was still a law in the books, and she heckled a president who's a favorite of mine, but she did it at an event, and she was removed by the Secret Service. But she made her point across. She stood up, and she stood up for my rights then, and that's who Zoe is. That's who you are, and it's not every day you could just say the Secret Service removed you from an event.
Well, he looked right at me and he said, "Do you have something to say?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And of course, you know me well enough to know, of course, I lived for that moment. Yes, I do. And I knew exactly what I was going to talk about. I was going to talk about sexual assault on women in the military. And the people around me started separating, like they were going to let me walk right up to that stage. And I was all ready. I'd rather be on the stage than out there. And but the Secret Service very kindly took my elbows and said, "Miss Nicholson, we're walking you out now." And I said, "I'm not going to collapse or anything. I'll go with you. Thank you very much." And they turned me and escorted me out of the building.
Yeah. Zoe, you are, I always call myself a little rabble rouser. I learned it from the best, many people like yourself. What I want to do is I want to share my screen, and I want to kind of go through in the last couple of minutes that we have some of the photos that you sent, and I would love to kind of show them to the people watching still. Is that okay?
Yeah, do you want me to narrate or no?
Yeah, you can narrate. So let's who can share?
Just in case anybody thinks I'm not serious, I have right here Alice's direction, create an acute situation. It's right there, forever and ever.
And just so everyone knows, as I hit this share screen, we're going to be, if Zoe mentioned a book or something like that, we're going to bring that up and we'll put it in the thank you email. Okay. All right, Zoe, you can see my wonderful screen here. And I'm going to go to from the beginning. And
well, this picture, I have to tell you about this picture because this is how my mother found out where I was. She had no idea. This is People magazine, not the magazine I thought I was going to be recorded in history, unlike my friend who was in Time. And no, this is People magazine, and on the cover is E.T., and I remember it vividly. And there we are, the people from People spent a number of days with us.
Wonderful. Here's another one of you in the rotunda, I believe.
And that's me. And yeah, with our guards. We had guards to protect us because right there on my, as you can see, my left shoulder was by the elevator. I had a man put a cigar out on my arm, and people would drop food on us. And so we actually had guards around us.
Mm-hmm. Oh, here we go.
There it is, and that is the moment. And I have in my hand the pen and what she signed. And yeah, I had a different name then. My last name was Ananda.
And then here's another one.
When she came in there, it was crazy talk. I mean, it was, the whole rotunda turned bright red. It was astonishing.
It's kind of like that episode where all those buses come in and you just see a throng of people come in at the last minute.
Yes.
And then here's this news story. That's the same photo. Here's you.
Rebellion. It's the pizza. It's pizzas. They're coming. This is actually, I'm sitting in the grandstand the day all the first ladies came and spoke. And a friend of mine named Ruby took this picture. It's one of my favorites.
Yes. That's one of, yes, you're right. There is another one.
Oh, there I am. Yes, that is when she took it. And Sister Maureen Fiedler is speaking. And we're on the dais. and the first ladies had just spoken.
Mm-hmm.
This is the gentleman explaining to the children to not get too close to us because we were witches. We were going to cast a spell on them, and that if we got our way, those boys and girls would have to go to the bathroom. They were in the same room.
You know, the funny thing about this photo is I can hear this man actually saying that
Oh,
in
yeah.
my head. And then here's another one. Do you see it? Zoe?
I'm fine.
I apologize, everyone. I lost you for a second. That's okay.
All right.
All right, and then we're just going to go back to this last photo. I apologize, everyone. We gotta love technology these days. Okay.
Oh, yeah. So up on top of this Lady Stop ERA sign, I thought was so funny. There's this little tiny sign on top of her sign, which I must have accidentally cut off when I sent this to John. It says, "Eat for the ERA," which, it's so ridiculous that they actually thought we were going to bail out if we ate the Snickers candy bars that they would eat in front of us. Yeah, this one is pretty fantastic.
And then here's this one.
Yes, and one of the problems that we had with the ACLU allowed us to protected us. We signed papers that we would not be force-fed, and it's a good thing because one of the Catholic legislators wanted us to be taken to the hospital emergency room and fed intravenously. He met us at the hotel and said that we were breaking the rules of his church by fasting, and I couldn't resist telling him that I believe my major in Roman Catholic theology, it got pretty clear in my head that Jesus was the faster.
Yeah.
And there we are all lined up in our little chairs.
Yeah.
And that's Sonia, who's in the wheelchair to the right. And Sonia was certainly the most sick of all of us. And she arrived very ill. Very thin, and she had the hardest time. She was taken to the hospital several times and refused treatment of any kind. Yeah, it was extraordinary.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and stop sharing here. We'll get back to you and me.
Yeah.
All right, Zoe. I want to, before we leave, I want the audience, whatever that is, I want them to know where they can find you, where they can follow you, where we can keep learning from you. I know where to find you. I'm probably going to call you after this, just so you know, because I'd say thank you. But what can we do?
Well, I will tell you that if you want to know anything about me, the Anchor website, everything comes off of that. You go there, anything there is. Terrible.
Wonderful. Well, everyone, it's been amazing. Zoe, I want to thank you for being here with us, for giving us your time, for all of the individuals. Sorry for the one small snafu right at the end. That's always how it works, though. And please make sure you go follow. We're going to post this on our YouTube page. But Zoe, on behalf of the chapter, on behalf of myself, on behalf of so many, thank you for fighting for equality. Thank you for being a warrior for those of us who might be too afraid to stand up. And with that, I just want to tell you I love you, and I'm so thankful to have you in my life. And so many people share that, I'm sure, as well.
Thank you so much.
All right, goodbye, everyone.
Wash your hands, wear a mask.
Wash your hands, wear a mask, stay safe. And everyone, thank you again for joining. We're so excited you were here. And Zoe, I'll see you on the other side.
Okay.